This is David Prosper, host of The Leadership Revolution. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast from Public House Media.
Strike three, you're out. Welcome back to Caught Listening, the baseball show that goes beyond the white lines. Christian Heimel here with you, broadcasting as always as part of the Public House Media Network. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Just search Caught Listening by Public House Media. You can also email the show, caughtlisteningphm@gmail.com. We love hearing from you guys on your suggestions as to what you'd like our shows to be. Again, we're not really going to touch on the headlines all that much. We're going to touch on the nuances of baseball, maybe the history of it as well. But one of the things that you guys did reach out about was, what's the process like of ownership changing hands in Major League Baseball? We've had it recently over the last couple of years. The Los Angeles Dodgers may be the most noticeable, but it did also happen in 2020 of all years somehow, and that is with Steve Cohen becoming the new majority owner of the New York Mets. And who better to help us talk about it than the guy who broke the story and broke Twitter, I guess, at one point. He is Joe Pantorno, sports editor of AM New York and a good friend of the show. Joe, how are you, bud?
Hey, Christian, I'm doing well. Hope you're doing all right, and thank you so much for having me on again. It's great to be back.
Also, always good to talk with you, and I know you're busy, newly married as well, so congratulations on that, especially in a weird year like this. But take me through this process, because, again, one of the things that was kind of fun to watch, and this is on a personal note, having known you for as long as I have, and really just with any friend in general, is the validation for us as journalists, the validation that you get from social media in terms of being a quote-unquote go-to source, or a reliable source, I should say, on certain topics is huge for any of us. And so I know that really happened with you during all this story, but kind of take me through that in when you started hearing rumblings on, number one, the sale of the Mets, but then on the fact that it was likely going to be Steve Cohen.
Yeah, it's definitely humbling, and of course I appreciate you following for as long as you have. This was one of the wilder stories that I've ever covered, and I don't want to, I don't want to come to this thought process that maybe I've already peaked in my professional journalism career, but I don't think that I'll cover as wild a story as this was, because really I got, the first scoop of things going down with Steve Cohen during his first initial pursuit of the team, which was last December. It was December 2019. He entered negotiations with the Wilpons. At the time, he was an 8% minority owner of the Mets. So he entered these exclusive negotiations, and really everything kind of fell silent. And in February, I'd say it was either the first or second week of February, I got a tip that the deal was kind of teetering on the brink of falling through. So I had to do a little bit of digging, found out that, that hunch was actually fact. And sure enough, a day or two later, it came out that was it. And for the most part, we thought that was the end of Steve Cohen. And that's what I was really hearing through a couple of different sources until June. And that was after the news came out that this was going to be more of a traditional auction style, that a bank was going to be, a third-party bank was going to be running this sales process. And really then out of nowhere, in July or so, we started kind of hearing these rumblings that Steve was on his way back, or that he was looming, and that any interested suitor in the Mets was always concerned with Steve Cohen kind of just lurking in the background. And obviously, with hindsight being 2020, they had every right to feel that way. So, yeah, in August, it kind of heated up that he was in alongside the Harrison Blitzer group and the Alex Rodriguez and Jennifer Lopez group. And as soon as he was confirmed in being an interested party, basically we all kind of understood, or were performing under the assumption that this was his team to lose after all. And we understood that his relationship with the Wilpons wasn't the best. We knew that he had a checkered past that might have run into some issues with getting Major League Baseball approval. But in that same breath, especially in 2020, money talks. And Steve Cohen is worth an estimated $14.6 billion. So once, again, he was confirmed as an interested party, it was just kind of a matter of time. And then I was lucky enough to have a source reach out to me in early September saying that, this team is his, it's going to happen. And then a week later, the night before he actually entered an agreement with the Wilpon family, I was told that it was, it was all going down the next day. So that kind of really helped put me on the map in terms of a professional standpoint. And then it was kind of all downhill from there.
But again, this has been a story that's been developing for a year and has had so many twists and turns because, like you had mentioned, this at first didn't appear to be the normal way of selling a team where you have a bank basically act as a third-party mediator, an auction essentially occurs, and it's the highest bid. This was one of those things where this was almost like I'm trying to remember when the Panthers just recently sold in the NFL, you had a guy who had a minority stake. Now, granted, the Panthers you had a gentleman who has a minority stake in a different league, or different team, but guy already had a minority stake, and it was just him taking over, which in a normal business world is kind of normal. But this it started to get very, very strange throughout the summer. And one of the strangest ones, at least for me, was this group of Alex Rodriguez and Jennifer Lopez getting involved. How did that come about, and how serious was that?
It was serious, and it obviously kind of came out of left field just based on the names, the name recognition, I guess you could say. But when the Mets were made available to any interested party, their name emerged pretty quickly. And, I poked and prodded around A-Rod and J-Lo's camp, and I really wasn't able to find much, but I actually had the most success through Jennifer Lopez's representation. And basically, it was just, no comment, swearing up and down. But sometimes a no comment means everything, because if they had nothing to do with it, it would have been simply, Jennifer Lopez or Alex Rodriguez don't want any part of it. So
right.
They were, I would say, number two throughout all this. They were kind of waiting in the wings, and they certainly had the backing from certain media members around the New York area. They had support of even some people in Major League Baseball, some owners, some people within the Mets organization. So really, I think a lot of it had to do with, the reason why they were so prominent was because a lot of it was fueled by the media.
Right.
But at the same time, they were able to accrue this kind of star-studded ownership group, but it was a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And while they did have the money to make a bid, they really didn't have that additional capital to sustain the franchise and, make them this perceived contender that they might be under Steve Cohen. And, it was up until Cohen's approval where, Major League Baseball owners were voting for his approval when they were waiting to get word from New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio that, it was okay for him to close this deal and take over this team. Alex Rodriguez and Jennifer Lopez were waiting, basically saying, hey, if this falls through, we're here. We're ready.
Right.
So it was, I don't want to say it was a threat, but in the grand scheme of things, they wouldn't have been able to properly run a professional sports franchise as effectively as Steve Cohen is poised to run the Mets right now.
And Steve Cohen, obviously hedge fund manager, and what makes you mentioned it earlier, his a little bit of a checkered past, which to many people, when you look into it, given the world that we're in, there are worse crimes, obviously, but in the business world there may not be. His checkered past almost got him out of, almost got this deal blown up but not because of his past, but by the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio himself. That was the most intriguing left turn or roadblock possible that I could have ever imagined, not because it's a mayor saying we don't want you in our city. The lease agreement with Citi Field in New York City, take us through that and where that all ended up. Obviously, it ended up getting figured out because Cohen ended up buying the Mets. But take us through that whole process, because that was one of those things, following it on social media, following it from afar, was just one of the weirdest things I could have imagined.
Yeah, it was like one of those random, freaky, last-minute, like soap opera-like twists where you finally thought that Steve Cohen was in the clear. We had gotten reports and hints that he wasn't going to run into much opposition from MLB ownership approval. And it was all over except, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And then we hear that, Mayor Bill de Blasio has the power to block this move under this 2006 stadium lease agreement that states any person who was convicted of a felony could be blocked by the mayor from taking over, the land that Citi Field was on, and thus the Mets. So there was reason for pause because Steve Cohen's former hedge fund, SAC Capital, had to pay $1.8 billion in fines back in 2013 for wires and securities fraud. But Cohen himself was never charged, let alone convicted of a crime. So it really seemed like de Blasio didn't have much of a leg to stand on. So, for the most part, I think it was, we all thought that it was a lot of grandstanding from the mayor. It was a lot of posturing in a way, just to kind of insert himself into the story a bit. But at the end of the day, I think most of us believe that this wasn't going to be much of an issue, except for a couple of these other media outlets that were semi-rooting for, the reemergence of Alex Rodriguez and Jennifer Lopez. So it was a lot of moving parts, but, again, it all just kind of, it all just kind of fell into place, I guess, on that, April Friday a few weeks ago where, Cohen gets the ownership approval, he gets the necessary votes, and de Blasio, moments later says everything's fine, he can go ahead with it.
Talking with Joe Pantorno, sports editor of AM New York, who broke the story on Steve Cohen being the new owner of the New York Mets. You mentioned MLB ownership approval. Obviously, that's necessary with any transition of power, I guess, in Major League Baseball, really in any transition of power throughout business in general. What kind of concern was there? How much concern? And do we know really where the concern was coming from these MLB owners who maybe didn't want Steve Cohen as a part of this?
Yeah, there was some concern. I think the vote was 26-4, and really those 4 no votes derived from Chicago White Sox owner Jerry Reinsdorf, who, for whatever reason it might be, we're not really sure. He just was always going to be opposed to Cohen. Granted, there has been speculation and some evidence that he was close to Alex Rodriguez. I think that he wanted to see him kind of take over, and Jerry Reinsdorf has the kind of pull where he could take a few other owners with him, but it was never enough to really threaten Cohen's ability to get approval. And, we've kind of seen it before where, Reinsdorf and I think it was Artie Moreno in Los Angeles, and there were a couple others I can't recall off the top of my head. But they actually kind of roll in a pack together and share common interests, whatever they might be. But obviously they are in the minority here as, here we are with Steve Cohen with the Mets. So.
Yeah, Reinsdorf, A-Rod has credited him as being a mentor of his in the business side of things. So not surprising there that he would want to see his mentee get that at some point. I want to backtrack a little bit because what makes this interesting is not just the story and the roller coaster for Mets fans and for staff, I'm sure, but the fact that this doesn't happen often. They're generally speaking, selling a major league franchise or a professional sports franchise happens when either a family member dies and the next of kin doesn't want to be a part of it, or something awful happens where you need to get rid of an owner like Donald Sterling a few years ago with the Los Angeles Clippers. What ultimately led the Wilpons to wanting to do this and move on from being the owners of the Mets and basically seeking a new owner?
Yeah, this is kind of that overarching question where, fans have been calling for this for years. For over a decade, I could remember going to Mets games and, hearing those chants of sell the team and those T-shirts, sell the team and everything like that. And I think a lot of us never actually expected this day to come. But in that same breath, the Wilpon family had been, over the past 10, 12 years, they had been pretty much destroyed financially, whether it was their, whether it was the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme.
Right.
They were hemorrhaging money. The Mets as a franchise themselves were hemorrhaging money. Really, they weren't effective owners, and their fortune, that was started with Sterling Equities, the commercial real estate development company, it was dwindling. And, this was a time where, I think a realization was made that, hey, we can make some serious coin, probably unprecedented coin for selling a team. And it is, it's a record, $2.4 billion for a team. And really the initial negotiations with Steve Cohen, they were actually poised to make more. Initially last year, he was going to buy the Mets for $2.6 billion. And then the COVID-19 shutdown happened, and it was bad timing, I guess, on their part. But again, in the grand scheme of things, Steve Cohen was actually able to come out on top with a bit of a discount. So yeah, it's been such a weird, wacky, zany story. And I think we kind of the writing was on the wall, really, where they just kind of realized that their time was up. And if they didn't sell the team, 2021 would have been a disaster for the Mets. A source told me back in June that they weren't going to put much into the team if they don't sell. The payroll would have decreased even more, which would be, almost unprecedented for a team that's playing in a major New York market. So at the time, I was actually being told that Steve Cohen had dodged a bullet just because of the pandemic and everything like that. But, it's kind of funny how these things work out. I won't say that the Wilpons got out at the right time, but they certainly salvaged the sale of the team. And at the end of the day, they made some money. And, I think that there's a hope that they can make even a little bit more by selling the regional network, SNY, which broadcasts all these Met games. But that's a little bit more of a wait-and-see basis.
And that brings us to the next question, and the next kind of topic I want to touch on is, watching his introductory press conference, you got this feeling that despite one of the worst economic years in U.S. history, despite baseball losing so many millions of dollars in terms of fan revenue, ticket gates, sponsorship dollars, all of that stuff, that the Mets in one fell swoop went from a dwindling payroll and a decreasing payroll to let's go buy everybody and win it all for the next few years. You almost got that feel that that's what Steve Cohen wanted to do, was become what the Yankees used to be, and that was outspend everybody.
Right. And that, I think, was the initial concern amongst MLB owners, is that, here was this new kid on the block, this perceived bad boy who, like we said, had that checkered past, and he was just going to come in and he was going to spend wildly. That notion was quickly dispelled, both to me and to other reporters, where we were told that, yes, Steve Cohen has this great fortune, but he's going to spend reservedly almost. He's going to, spend his money responsibly. And at the end of the day, this guy is a businessman. He didn't build, this $14.6 billion fortune by being reckless. And he was going to run the Mets like one of his businesses, where He's going to make sure that he makes the correct investments, and he's going to ensure that he has the long-term networks, whether it's building up the farm system or international scouting, or ensuring that there's a fortified and increased analytics department, making sure that the right baseball minds are in the right places in the front office. All of those things he wanted to make sure that they were in place so that the Mets, aren't a team that makes a World Series once every 15, 20 years, or that they, make the playoffs more than 2 years in a row for the first time in franchise history. So I think that was certainly calming. Bringing in Sandy Alderson, that definitely appeased to these MLB owners. So now that he's in there, he's keeping to his word, obviously. But at the same time, he has the capability to clean up. Just considering today's climate right now, it's, baseball's market. In 2020, Major League Baseball and its teams lost a combined $3.1 billion.
Yeah.
You're seeing teams shedding salary, turning down contracts of pretty prominent stars, allowing them to walk into free agency. This is a majority of the league. And while all of these teams, well, not all, but a lot of these teams are purging, the Mets are getting ready to load up. So they are the minority here where they're going to be adding salary while a lot of teams are going to be shedding. And that's good timing, and it bodes really well for them moving forward.
Considering the free agent class that is out there with Trevor Bauer, the reigning Cy Young Award winner, JT Realmuto, DJ LeMahieu, and a number of others in prominent spots where the Mets could certainly use that help, while you've got a young roster of stars that are still under their pre-arbitration contracts, it certainly bodes well for Mets fans in the coming 2-3 years, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why, we've seen through the first couple of weeks of the off season, the Mets are being linked to almost every prominent name. We've heard that, they need to bolster their starting pitching staff. Well, Trevor Bauer is a target. Well, they need help at catcher. And this was even before Steve Cohen was confirmed as Mets owner. This is back in August. It was, if Steve Cohen comes in, well, the Mets are going to be a favorite to get JT Realmuto. They need a natural center fielder. So George Springer becomes a logical fit. And again, he's being mentioned with the Mets. So this is new territory for the franchise and especially the fans, where they're not entering an offseason with, these hopes of, well, maybe we can pretend to make a run at one of these stars and then kind of build our team on a budget, which has always been, the MO of the Wilpon family. Now it's actually, well, we have the resources. Now we expect to be in on these guys. And it's only been 2 weeks. We've only had 2 weeks of Steve Cohen. So this is just a sign of things to come. And, as he gets a little bit more established and the Mets front office is actually put in place, when they find a president of baseball operations, when they find a general manager, then we'll really start to see the Mets, I guess, starting to pounce and really, start seeing them make their moves.
Be interesting to see how it all plays out this offseason, but also in the years to come for Steve Cohen as the new owner of the New York Metropolitans. He's Joe Pantorno, the newly married Joe Pantorno, sports editor of AM New York and good friend of the show. Joe, as always, bud, we appreciate the time. And if there's ever someone, again, great job in terms of covering this story for over a year and being right at the head of it. And if there's ever someone to write a book on one of the craziest sellings of a professional franchise, I think we've got the story and I think we got the writer here. So you'll never peak in our minds, but we appreciate you spending some time with us.
Christian, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much again for the kind words, and I can't wait to do it again sometime.
Talk to you soon, pal.
All righty.
All right, it's Joe Pantorno, the sports editor at AM New York. And, yeah, it's interesting, man. The way these things go down can be so interesting. Just blows my mind most times how this all works out. But excited to have him on. Appreciate his time and appreciate your guys' suggestions of what the show can be about. That's the beauty of this show. Find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Search Caught Listening by Public House Media or email the show, caughtlisteningphm@gmail.com. What do you want to learn about in the world of baseball? Could be any level, could be any part of it. We're excited to talk about it, and we're excited to have it as a part of here. and hope you guys are excited to listen to it. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, share us with your friends and family. Amazon Podcasts, Apple, Google Podcasts, Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com, and, of course, publichousemedia.org. Until next week, I'm Christian Heimel. You have been caught listening.